So our first faculty presenter is Paul Heiney. Paul is professor of physics. He has taught physics at Penn continuously since 1982. I first heard Paul speak in 2008 when he presented at the Weigle Information Commons about how he uses clickers. And he has been using clickers for a long time. He teaches large lecture courses in physics. And today he will share with us his experiences designing good questions and stimulating student discussions. His work with clickers was recently featured in an NBC 10 news clip. It's linked from the Symposium website, and I do recommend watching it. On the clip, you will watch his students, and they speak very eloquently about how they have learned physics from him. So thank you, Paul.
Let me start off with a demographic question. How many people in this room are classroom instructors of some sort? Sorry, I'd expect most. How many of you are students? Students. A few brave souls, okay? How many of you have been students? If you're not raising your hand, you're probably not telling the truth. And I know there's some people here who are neither currently faculty nor students, but who are actively involved in the educational process. So I want to start by thinking about sizes of class. And here's a way of categorizing. You can say there's a tutoring session. That's when there's somebody who's working with a very small number, 1 to 3 students, right? You don't have to call it tutoring, but that's that size. And then what I might call a seminar, 3 to 15. Small class means by the 3rd day you might know everybody's in the class, and then a large class, okay? We obviously do all of these at Penn, okay? Now, let's see here. Who are the students again? There were some students. Yes. So as a student, in which of those contexts do you feel you would learn the most effectively?
It depends on the subject, but
Probably
probably tutoring.
tutoring? Okay. I mean, I suspect that many people would say that. Is there a classroom teacher who would like to comment on what context they think the most effective teaching happens? Anybody? Yes?
Seminar.
Seminar, okay. And why a seminar?
You have enough people, you have enough students to keep the activity going.
Okay. So I suspect that there may be a few people that would say I really do much better in a room of 300, okay? But not that many, okay? Not that many. My guess is that most people will say that the most effective teaching happens in the tutoring or the seminar context, but we don't teach all of our classes that way because it's economically not feasible, right? I mean, I'm sure the parents would love it, but the fact is if you're going to teach Psych 1, you're going to have more than 3 students per professor, okay? In fact, I would argue that we are conditioned by a million years of experience to do that. Our ancestors did not give a PowerPoint presentation on mastodon hunting, okay? It was more like the seminar on how to skin a mastodon or the tutorial on the best way to grind the manioc root, okay? I mean these were 1 or 2 adults teaching a small number of younger people. And it was very hands-on, right? When the student isn't skinning the mastodon right, you know, you kind of get in there. So that's the way we're used to learning, is that kind of very interactive, small number of people, hands-on. So if you look at large lectures, some of the difficulties that people can traditionally see with large lectures, first of all, if you have a big enough room, if you're in the audience, it can be kind of hard to stay focused. And we heard just 5 minutes ago about the browsing the web in the back of the room, or perhaps just going to sleep in the back of the room. Okay? There's a problem for the instructor, which is that you don't necessarily know whether your message is getting through. You may have explained it what you think is very, very clearly, and it may turn out that nobody is doing that. And then there's the question of how the instructor perceives what the educational process is and how the student perceives it. And we are still stuck in this model where knowledge is a thing that is poured into the student, okay? And in fact, everybody buys into this, right? You know, the teacher stands up there and delivers the knowledge, and the students feel that if they listen attentively and write everything down, that this knowledge will fill them up, okay? But it seems like actually no. really the way we learn, okay? So how could you address some of these problems? Well, the first one actually isn't so bad. You have to be a good teacher, okay? So what I'm talking about with technology today does not replace being a good teacher. If you're a lousy teacher, you're still going to be lousy with technology, okay? It's not a magic fix. So there's still a place for this one. And then, there are things you can do with technology that will make it more fun and exciting, and sometimes that's a gimmick, and sometimes that really helps, okay? But that kind of thing can help. The feedback, there are also some solutions for that, and in fact, I did all of those a few minutes ago. There's the looking around, there's the show of hands, okay, which can't be very quantitative if you have 100 people in the room, right? But you can sort of say most people seem to think this. There's the call an individual person, and the problem there is that you tend to call on the ones that you know will give coherent answers, okay? And then there's the can everybody, does anybody have an idea? And then we all know that you get the same 4 or 5 students doing that, okay? So that one actually works pretty well, because in the seminar, you can call on that shy person there who never wants to say anything. Well, what do you think? You can't do that in a large room. But I don't know of a good non-technological way of addressing this passive versus active. The active learning happens in the small seminar because you're having the discussion, you're having the back and forth, you're forcing people to engage with the material. That's where the clickers can come in. Now, for those of you who aren't familiar with it, actually I realize I haven't unwrapped this one yet, but you have a thing that's a USB thing that goes in the back of your laptop, okay, and that records the votes. And then the students get these things, which basically look a little like a TV remote, and you ask them some question, they push the number, and then you can get the answer out. Here is the way I use them. And there's different approaches. So you do the sort of the lecture thing, right? Some kind of new concept, so you tell them about it. And then you pose a multi-choice question to the students that forces them to grapple with the material that you have just presented and think about it. You ask them to discuss it in small groups, okay? And there's always a few that just refuse to join a group, okay? And they just sit there off in the corner thinking about it and being smart, okay? But most of them will do that. And then they vote. Sometimes I will actually then call, before we see the results, call on 1 or 2 individual students to say, what did you get? And then everybody sees the results. They get a histogram. And then, if everybody got it, you just move on. And if everybody got the wrong answer, then you slow way down, okay? And circle around again and try to say it a different way. So that's my approach, which is as a common approach used in the sciences. What's the value add? Well, the first is that every 10 minutes or so, the students have to wake up, okay? They don't have to, but, there's other stuff going on. The instructor gets this feedback on whether they actually got what you just said. They are made to actively engage with the material. So you are recreating little pockets of seminar or tutorial in this much larger class. They're learning in some sense by doing, they're thinking about the material. There's a lot of research out there now that says that even very technical things like physics, which is my subject, you learn better through social interactions. And I'm not enough of a psychologist to know why that is, but it seems to be the case. So those are some of the rationale. I'm going to show you in a second a question I've actually used, but don't worry. I'm not asking you to learn any physics in this. This is just an example of what a question looks like. There is a point in my freshman physics course when I'm talking about centripetal force. Okay, what keeps you going in a circle. And so I've put up some equations, and there's all these different equations, and they're kind of confused. And then I asked them this question about, there's a couple of bugs on a turntable going around, and there's some acceleration, and they asked them, which one is bigger and by how much. And the tricky thing about this one is they've just gotten 2 equations, one of which would tend to indicate number 2, and one of which would tend to indicate number 4. And so they have to kind of parse this and figure out which one of those you might actually use. So this one typically gets a fairly intense discussion. These are actual results. Okay, in this case, nobody voted for number 5 or 6. There were a few outliers for number 1 or 3, but it was almost evenly split between 2 and 4. At that point, I talk about why it is that number 2, which was actually not the Midori, is the correct answer. And at that point, they're kind of primed because they've just been worrying about these equations, and then they can sort of see where they might have gone astray. So what makes a good clicker question? You can come up with all kinds of questions. First of all, it's just-in-time learning, right? You have a question that is on something that they have just finished. It's just been poured into them, okay, right? But they haven't figured it out yet. You want something that actually makes them think critically, okay? You want to have more than one answer that could make sense, and in fact, best ones have a distractor, okay, or more than one, a question that looks like it would make sense, but in fact, that isn't the correct one. That one was semi-quantitative. Occasionally, I'll actually do a question where they actually have to pull out their calculators and do something. But the qualitative ones here are much better than the quantitative ones. They're going to have plenty of chances in the homework to do quantitative questions, okay? This is getting their understanding. And it's good to have one where there's a little bit of a bell curve, right? Where a lot of the students get it, but not all of them, okay? Occasionally you give one where everybody gets it, and that makes them feel good. Yeah, I really understood that, right? We're all doing great. If I give a question where nobody in the room gets it, which happens occasionally, then I realize I'm going to have to either fine-tune the lecture part that goes before or do something about the question. But if nobody in the room got it, and in fact, if only 15% of the students in the room got it, then something is wrong. Okay? So there's sort of some guidelines. This is not the only way that clickers are used on campus. Okay? I'm aware of numerous other faculty in other departments, other schools. So in a social science class, okay, quite often people will use it just to kind of get the diversity of opinion about some particular topic, okay? Some kind of view on social or ethical questions. So basically it's sort of as an opinion poll, right? Or to find out, where people came from or whatever. Some faculty use it for graded quizzes, so I should say that when I do it, whether they voted is part of their grade, but the wrong answer does not count against them. So I simply want them to be out there thinking about it, but I tell them, if you get the wrong answer, that doesn't count against you. Now, there are people who use this in a graded way, and there's arguments for and against that. There are also people who use it just for attendance. If it's too big a part of your grade, you risk having that student in the back row with 5 clickers in front of them, okay? So then you have to be a little more aware of the sort of the security aspect of it, okay? You become a bit more of a prison guard and a little bit less of an instructor, but that's another question. Students seem to be generally positive, okay? So if you look at, say, course reviews, things like the poll that Anu did, some students really, really love it. Most students seem to like it. And a few students are quite hostile. Okay? A few students really feel that this is, gimmickry and technology for its own sake and so forth. So, I have to respect that opinion. Instructors that I've spoken with who've done this generally enjoy teaching this way, but it does have some overhead. You can't just sort of, yeah, Anu's starting to look too friendly here. Okay, I'm almost done. You can't just sort of use it once a week as sort of a little addendum. You have to figure out how to restructure your lectures, okay? And frankly, I have not seen any real metrics as to whether this really improves long-term learning. Okay, I'd like to believe it does, but I don't know. Last slide, I should comment, this is not my idea. This was originally pioneered by a guy named Eric Nazar at Harvard. There are many institutions where this is the standard. I was just talking with somebody at Santa Barbara, and I mentioned I was doing this, and he said, well, yeah, he says, everybody here does that, what's the big deal? So some places this is the standard, okay? At Penn, I would say it's still relatively rare, even though there are people in all the schools who do it. I should also say that Anu, I know, is pushing this, that the technology is a moving target, and my guess is that 5 years from now, we will hopefully be doing something that is interactive in this way, but probably not exactly with clickers. So that's it.
Thank you, Paul, for your presentation. We welcome all of you to come and explore Clickers. You can borrow a class set from the Commons or from Multimedia Services and explore them informally with your students. We're now